Winning a Grammy is often seen as the highest achievement in the music world, the final proof that an artist has truly made it. For Petula Clark, however, success never meant safety or peace. Her voice brought comfort to millions during World War II, lifting spirits in dark shelters and war-torn streets, yet no one could protect her from the men who controlled her career. Behind the cheerful melodies and bright smile was a woman who faced rejection, harassment, and manipulation for decades. While audiences heard happiness and hope in her songs, she quietly struggled with depression. Her marriage slowly fell apart under the weight of secrets she felt unable to share. Even in 2023, at the age of 90, she nearly lost the very voice that had defined her life. The woman who spent decades spreading joy across the world lived much of her life fighting private battles no one could see, and the truth behind her story is deeply heartbreaking. Petula Clark was born Sally Olwen Clark on November 15, 1932, in Epsom, Surrey. She grew up in a modest home near Long Grove Hospital, where both of her parents worked as nurses. Money was always tight, and the effects of the Great Depression could be felt in every household around them. From a young age, Petula learned responsibility. She helped with household chores, looked after her siblings, and learned patience early in life. Life was simple and slow, but it carried meaning. Those early years shaped her gentle outlook on people and the world, and that kindness later became part of her voice long before the public ever knew her name. Her father had a playful imagination that brought light into difficult times. One day, he combined the names of two former girlfriends, Pet and Ulla, and came up with the name Petula. He said it sounded cheerful, something families desperately needed during those hard years. Petula later confirmed the story herself, and it reflected how her family managed to keep creativity and warmth alive even when life was challenging. Her mother, Doris, was a trained soprano and noticed Petula's gift almost as soon as she could speak. By the time Petula was 5 years old, she was already learning folk songs and singing them at family gatherings. The world outside their home felt uncertain and cold, but when she sang, the room felt warm. Those small performances slowly built her confidence and planted the seeds of her future. Everything began to change when she was 7 years old. In 1939, she stood on a small stage and mimicked popular radio singers like Vera Lynn. Teachers immediately noticed her talent and encouraged her to continue. Britain was on the edge of war, and a child with such a bright, hopeful voice felt like a symbol of comfort. That moment opened doors she could never have imagined. She began performing more frequently, bringing comfort to soldiers and listeners at home. Despite her growing presence on the radio, her home life remained grounded and simple. Hospital shifts still ruled her parents' routines, and Petula watched them care for others with compassion. That example shaped her deeply. Even as her voice became familiar across Britain, she remained the same girl who helped with dishes and listened patiently to others. By 1939, she was secretly recording her own little performances on her father's old gramophone. She practiced imitating Shirley Temple and other stars, singing softly into the crackling machine. When her parents discovered what she was doing, they simply smiled and encouraged her. It brought her joy at a time when the world was growing darker with the approach of war. Then came the night that changed her life forever. On October 17, 1942, at just 9 years old, she sang Mighty Like a Rose on the BBC Empire service for a program called It's All Yours. She dedicated the song to her uncle, who was stationed in Iraq. Britain was exhausted by war, with air raid sirens piercing the nights, but her small, gentle voice offered a moment of calm in the chaos. After the broadcast, hundreds of letters poured into the BBC. People wrote about how her voice comforted them and asked to hear her again. She continued singing, even during air raids, performing for children hiding underground. By the end of 1942, she was appearing on BBC Radio every week. Soon she was nicknamed Britain's Shirley Temple and radio's Merry Mimic. On December 20, 1942, she performed at the Queensberry All Services Club, now known as the Prince Edward Theatre, in front of more than 500 troops. She sang patriotic songs and made them laugh. She was only 10 years old, but she already understood how deeply people needed moments of relief. Before turning 12, she had performed in more than 500 concerts for ENSA, traveling through blackout zones, visiting evacuated children and soldiers, and performing even while German rockets shook the walls around her. At just 10 years old, she began hosting her own BBC radio show called Pet's Parlour. She sang, interviewed soldiers, read letters from families, and even changed lyrics to suit special requests. Every week, she tried to lift someone's spirits, and thousands of messages arrived from around the world. Even at such a young age, she had a natural ability to make people feel seen and heard. Her success on radio soon led to film opportunities. In 1944, She appeared in Medal for the General, playing a street child who sang about dreaming of a better future. Despite ongoing air raids, the film was praised for her honesty and natural performance. It opened the door to cinema, and she walked through it with confidence. During the Blitz, she sang in bomb shelters at just 8 years old, calming frightened families with songs like The White Cliffs of Dover while rockets fell outside. That courage built a quiet strength inside her that stayed with her for the rest of her life. But after the war ended, everything changed. In May 1945, only weeks after VE Day, the BBC dropped her. She was 13 years old. They called her a wartime novelty and said they no longer needed child singers. The rejection hurt deeply. For the next 2 years, she lived away from the spotlight, studying at secretarial school and quietly auditioning for West End roles. Rejection followed her again and again. She was told she was too young or simply not the right fit. The world that once celebrated her no longer seemed to know what to do with her, but she refused to give up. Even during this difficult period, her film career continued. At just 12, she had filmed I Know Where I'm Going, shot in the Scottish Hebrides during one of the coldest winters on record. She worked through freezing winds, rain, and long days on remote islands, surprising everyone with her discipline and professionalism. That work ethic became her trademark. In 1945, she starred in Strawberry Roan, playing a girl who loved horses despite never having ridden one. She trained for weeks, learning to ride ponies for the role. The film had a very small budget, but her performance stood out, earning praise for its emotional honesty. By 1949, she had appeared in 14 films and was already a familiar face in British homes. One of her most loved roles came in the early television series Here Come the Huggets, where she played a witty teenager in a working-class family. Audiences loved how real the show felt, and Petula's charm made her unforgettable. The series ran for 3 years and helped her transition smoothly from radio to film and television. At 16, she signed her first recording contract with EMI Columbia. Her debut single did not chart, but it introduced her to producer George Martin, who later became famous for shaping the Beatles' sound. She remembered how nervous she felt in the studio, but his guidance helped her relax and find confidence in her voice. The music industry, however, had its darker sides. At just 15, her agent pushed her towards suggestive modeling jobs to increase her fame. She refused every offer, even when people insisted it would help her career. She wanted respect, not shortcuts. That decision protected her during a time when many young performers were exploited. It showed how strong her character already was. By the mid-1950s, her music career finally began to take off. In 1954, she released The Little Shoemaker, a light and playful song that climbed to number 7 on the UK charts and stayed there for 12 weeks. It became a hit internationally, reaching number 1 in Australia and proving she had global appeal. In 1955, Suddenly There's a Valley pushed her even higher, reaching number 9 in the UK and selling over 200,000 copies. When she performed it live on Sunday night at the London Palladium, nearly 20 million people watched. Overnight, she became a teenage sensation. Her voice fit perfectly with the gentle mood of the song, and the exposure turned her into one of Britain's strongest young female vocalists. In 1957, With All My Heart reached number 3, and for the first time, the B-side featured a song she had written herself. Recording at Abbey Road Studios allowed her to experiment with richer orchestral sounds that would later define her style. Around the same time, she took a bold step by recording in French. In 1956, she released Chariot, which later became I Will Follow Him. It topped the Belgian charts and spread across Europe. A British singer recording in French was unusual, but her success proved she could connect beyond language. By 1957, she was touring Europe, performing dozens of shows and winning over international audiences. That success continued with Sailor, which became her first UK number 1 and even outsold Elvis Presley records. By the end of the 1950s, she was the highest-charting British female artist of the decade. In 1960, at the age of 27, she moved to Paris, signed with Vogue Records, and released Romeo, which sold 1.5 million copies and turned her into a star across Europe. Known as La Petula, she shared stages with major French artists and filled legendary venues, proving once again that her voice could cross borders and touch hearts everywhere. The change in her career was strong and it slowly blended into her personal life as well. During this time, she fell in love with Claude Wolff, and the two married in 1961. Her success in France helped her cross language and cultural barriers and placed her among the biggest names in European music. She was no longer just a British singer trying something new. She had become a true international star. In 1962, she released Why Why Twist, a lively French version of Lee Dorsey's song. The record captured the excitement of the twist dance craze that was sweeping across Europe. It stayed at number 1 in France for 12 straight weeks, which was an incredible achievement. When she performed it on the popular television show Salut les Copains, nearly 15 million people tuned in. Her energy felt fresh and exciting, yet still gentle and approachable. Unlike many louder performers, she brought a softer but powerful presence to the dance scene. Even more surprising was the song's success in the UK, where it reached the top 20, something that almost never happened with French-language songs at the time. That same year, she won the Grand Prix du Disque in France, officially being named the country's top female singer of 1962. This recognition confirmed that her move to France had been the right decision. Instead of staying comfortable, she continued to take risks. In 1965, she worked with Serge Lama on C'est ma chanson, the French version of This Is My Song, written by Charlie Chaplin. At first, she did not want to record it. She worried that the song's very simple lyrics might overshadow her other work, especially in the UK, where she was building a strong reputation. Claude Wolff encouraged her to take the chance, and she finally agreed. The decision proved successful. The French version reached number 1 in France, and the English version climbed to number 1 in the UK in February 1967. It sold more than 500,000 copies and became one of her most famous songs. While the success caused some tension with her record label, which wanted more songs like it, she felt the track had become almost too dominant in her career. Still, it added another major achievement to her already impressive journey. Another important door opened in 1963 when she toured Japan. She became the first Western woman to perform at the Buden, a venue that had previously been reserved for martial arts events and major national ceremonies. This alone was historic. Her shows combined English and French songs, and Japanese audiences welcomed her warmly. She outsold major local stars and quickly became a sensation. Her album released in Japan reached the top of the charts, and her television appearances were watched by millions. For many people in Japan, she became one of their first introductions to Western pop music. Her influence helped shape musical tastes in the country during an important time of cultural change. In 1964, she continued pushing herself by recording songs in Italian and Spanish. One of her Italian releases went straight to number 1. To keep up with the demand, she learned lyrics phonetically, sometimes memorizing entire songs overnight before studio sessions. Her Spanish and Italian recordings included well-known titles, and she delivered them convincingly, even though they were not her native languages. This ability to adapt quickly and perform naturally in multiple languages set her apart from most artists of the time. Very few performers in the early 1960s could manage this level of versatility. Despite her growing success, she still faced unfair treatment. In 1962, French promoters paid her only half of what male singers received, even when she appeared on the same shows as stars like Johnny Hallyday. She kept letters and records that showed this inequality, but she chose to continue working rather than walking away. At the time, gender inequality was deeply rooted in the entertainment industry, and her patience and persistence quietly helped open doors for other women who followed. Then came one of the most defining moments of her career. In 1964, producer Tony Hatch discovered a melody while in Paris and brought it to her. At first, she felt it sounded too American and wasn't sure it suited her style. Still, on October 16th, she recorded the song in just 2 takes at Pi Studios. The session was rushed and intense. Tony Hatch was still finishing some of the lyrics only minutes before the recording, writing them in the studio restroom. More than 30 musicians played on the track, including future legends like Jimmy Page and Big Jim Sullivan. The song was Downtown. When Downtown was released in the UK, it climbed to number 2 on the charts, held back only by the Beatles and their song I Feel Fine. But its impact in the United States was even greater. In January 1965, it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. This made her the first UK female artist to achieve a US number 1 since 1952. By the end of the year, the song had sold more than 3 million copies worldwide. Almost overnight, she became a global icon. Only weeks later, she appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. On March 14, 1965, she performed Downtown live without any rehearsal because she arrived just 45 minutes before the broadcast. Around 50 million Americans watched her sing. That single appearance placed her at the center of the British invasion and turned her into one of the biggest international stars of the decade. Her follow-up song, I Know a Place, became another major hit, reaching the top 10 in the United States and climbing to number 3 on the charts. The song reflected the spirit of youth culture and the civil rights movement, suggesting a place where everyone could belong and feel accepted. To capture the sound Tony Hatch imagined, The recording required a 40-piece orchestra, giving the song a rich and powerful feeling that matched its hopeful message. That fullness in the music made it feel larger and more emotional than most songs of that time. Young listeners connected to it strongly, especially in countries where racial tension and social division were part of daily life. Then, on April 2, 1968, a quiet but powerful moment happened on live American television. During her NBC special, Petula Clark was singing an anti-war duet with Harry Belafonte. In the middle of the song, she gently reached out and touched his arm. It was a small, natural gesture that lasted only a second, but it carried enormous meaning. It was the first time a white woman had touched a black man on primetime television in the United States. The sponsor, Chrysler, reacted with fear as soon as they saw it. Executives demanded the scene be filmed again with the two singers standing apart. They were worried about backlash from viewers, especially in the southern states. Petula refused. Her husband, who was producing the show, supported her decision. They insisted the moment remain exactly as it happened. When the episode aired unchanged, the reaction was intense. Letters flooded in from across the country. Many praised her courage, while others sent threats filled with hatred. Belafonte later said he even considered publicly calling for a boycott of Chrysler cars until he learned the complaint came from one frightened executive, not official company policy. Still, the moment remained untouched. It broke a silent rule that had existed for far too long and became a lasting civil rights milestone. A year earlier, in April 1967, she had released a song born from a different kind of tension. Don't Sleep in the Subway climbed to number 5 in the United States and became one of her biggest hits. The idea came from a real argument she had with Tony Hatch during a London blackout. The song warned against storming out after a fight and ending up somewhere unsafe. In the UK, the word subway meant a pedestrian tunnel, but Hatch used the American meaning to give the song wider appeal. New York City helped push it even further. A rainy Times Square billboard campaign placed the song right in the middle of the city's restless energy. Musically, the song was complex, built from 3 different melodies Hatch had written. It moved from pop to orchestral sounds and then into a bright, beach-style chorus. It earned a Grammy nomination in 1968, though it lost to Up, Up and Away. Even so, it topped charts in Australia and became her final top 10 hit in the United States, proving how broad her reach had become. Her career on stage remained strong as well. In 1993, she joined the Broadway production of Blood Brothers as Mrs. Johnston. The show had struggled before she arrived, but once she joined the cast, everything shifted. Audiences grew, reviews improved, and her emotional performance became one of the show's strongest elements. She stayed with the production during its US tour in 1994 and 1995. That success was the result of years of stage experience. Back in 1970, she had led a London stage revue simply titled Petula. She performed 300 shows alone on stage, drawing serious praise and even talk of Olivier Award-level work. When she returned to the West End later in life, she did so effortlessly, proving she was not just a pop singer but a complete performer with deep skill and experience. Another chapter connected her again to Charlie Chaplin. He asked her to record This Is My Song for his 1967 film A Countess from Hong Kong. At first, she tried to refuse. She felt the English lyrics sounded old-fashioned and preferred to record the song in French. The studio insisted on English. Chaplin's perfectionism slowed everything down, and the sessions dragged on for months. She assumed the song would disappear quietly. She even tried to hide it as just another album track. Against her wishes, her label released it as a UK single. In February 1967, it reached number 1. Soon after, it climbed to number 3 in the United States and number 4 in Canada. What began as a reluctant project turned into a worldwide hit, tying her name permanently to Chaplin's final film work. Not every experience during her success was positive. In 1968, while performing in Las Vegas, she met Elvis Presley privately in a hotel suite. During the meeting, he made an advance she immediately rejected. She later described the situation as uncomfortable and unsettling. Elvis was known for pushing boundaries with women and often relied on his entourage to smooth over rejection. Petula walked out and kept her distance. She remained professional, but the memory stayed with her for years. It was another reminder of the risks women faced behind the scenes. Her Grammy success also came with a strong personal statement. In 1966, she won Best Rock and Roll recording for I Know a Place, but she chose to boycott the ceremony. Female artists were being paid less than male performers, even when competing for the same awards. She refused to attend. The decision was not widely reported at the time, but it later became recognized as one of the earliest public protests against gender pay inequality in the music industry. Her career shifted many times, especially between the ages of 40 and 60. The early 1970s were difficult when disco began to dominate the American music scene. In 1971, her single I Don't Know How to Love Him reached number 13, but planned US tours were cancelled because ticket sales were low. The setback was painful, but she adapted. She moved toward cabaret-style performances and smaller venues, especially in Australia and Asia. In 1972, she toured Australia with a small band, focusing on jazz standards and intimate storytelling. Instead of massive crowds, she sang to audiences who wanted closeness and emotion. This change allowed her to rebuild her career on her own terms. By 1974, she returned to British television with a BBC variety show titled Petula. It ran for 12 episodes and helped bring her back into the UK spotlight. One memorable night featured David Bowie, who appeared during a moment of his own artistic transformation. The show also welcomed other major names and reflected a time when she herself was stepping into a new phase of her career. Even though she had moved to Geneva in 1966 to raise her family, she returned to the West End in the 1980s with the musical Someone Like You. In 1984, she performed over 200 shows at the Strand Theatre. The production blended her classic hits with new material and was warmly received by audiences and critics alike. At 52, she proved she still had the power to lead a major stage production. In 1988, she surprised everyone again by releasing Downtown 88, a high-energy remix produced by Stock Aitken Waterman. The song reached number 10 in the UK and introduced her to a younger, dance music audience. She appeared on Top of the Pops, and suddenly a new generation recognized her name. Even in her mid-50s, she found ways to reinvent herself. Behind the applause, old battles continued. In 1975, she discovered a US label was paying her 40% less than male artists for a reissue of one of her albums. She took legal action. The case settled quietly, but it became another early example of a woman standing up against unfair treatment in the industry. In 1991, she performed at the Royal Variety Performance for Queen Elizabeth II. Wearing a shimmering gown, she sang Downtown and Don't Sleep in the Subway for millions watching at home. It became one of her final major royal appearances and a graceful summary of her place in British culture. At 68, in 2000, she stepped onto Broadway again in Sunset Boulevard as Norma Desmond. She completed 15 preview shows before a sudden health issue forced her to withdraw. Even so, her performance left a strong impression. She later recorded the studio cast album, which earned her a Tony nomination. In 2013, at 80, she recorded Lost in You in Nashville, blending her classic sound with country influences. The album charted internationally and introduced her to new listeners while staying true to her roots. 2 years later, at 82, she appeared on the Glastonbury stage. When she sang Downtown to a crowd of more than 100,000 people, the moment went viral and reminded the world of her lasting impact. Her memoir, released in 2024, finally revealed truths she had kept private for decades, including turning down a Beatles duet in 1965 because of scheduling conflicts. The book became a bestseller because it balanced her triumphs with her pain. In 2022, her 90th birthday concert at the Royal Albert Hall featured holograms of her younger self performing beside her. Thousands attended in person, and over 1 million watched online. It blended memory and technology into a powerful celebration of her legacy. In 2023, she faced one of her hardest moments when she contracted COVID and required vocal cord surgery. For the first time in over 80 years of performing, she feared losing her voice. She recovered, and by 2024, she returned to the stage in Europe. Her personal life carried its own struggles. Her marriage to Claude Wolfe lasted decades but changed over time. They lived separate lives while remaining married and raising their children. When he passed away in 2024, she described the grief as overwhelming. Motherhood brought constant guilt as she traveled endlessly for work. She missed school events and holidays and later admitted she often felt torn between family and career. The industry tested her repeatedly, from early rejection by the BBC to harassment she felt unable to speak about at the time. Therapy later helped her process the hidden pain. Even after threats following the Belafonte moment, she chose integrity over fear. That courage followed her throughout her life, shaping a career defined by resilience, reinvention, and a voice that refused to fade.